Since when do we let animals sit behind the wheel of a luxury rig? Get your black ass out of the cab before I drag you down myself.
Deputy Cody Brandt barked the words, his face contorted in pure condescension as he drove Naomi Whitfield backward until her spine slammed hard against the metal trailer. He didn't just ask for paperwork. With one rapid, forceful motion, Brandt seized her father's leather logbook out of her grip and, with a sudden jerk, ripped the cover half off.
Look at her shaking! Fancy truck, but still just a dirty, uneducated thief! Dirty thief! You hear me? Dirty thief!
Before Naomi could utter a single word, Deputy Kessler lunged forward, invading her space, driving a harsh assault of words straight into her face. With a violent twist of both hands, he cranked her right arm up behind her back, forcing the steel cuffs down until they bit deep into her wrist bones. Then he snatched her half-full coffee cup and hurled it down onto her boots, the hot liquid soaking her feet.
You piece of trash, little girl. People like you shouldn't talk back to the police. Enjoy the mud.
They thought they were choking the life out of a helpless nobody. They had absolutely no idea this black woman held their entire future in her hands. Welcome back to Beyond the Verdict. If you want to see the exact second this disgusting abuse of color of law authority shattered against a wall of federal power, hit that subscribe button right now. Let's get into the haul. The heat came up off the interstate in slow waves. You could actually see bending the far horizon into water that was not there. Naomi Whitfield brought the black Kenworth off the exit ramp and let it roll down into the travel plaza the locals called the Crossroads. Easing the big diesel back, with a touch she had spent 9 days relearning. The truck was old, and it was beautiful. A long nose rig the color of a moonless night, chrome stacks polished to a mirror, and along both doors, in a hand-lettered gold script that had faded and been repainted 3 times across the decades. 2 words, Whitfield Hauling. Her father's name, her father's truck, her father's road. She cut the engine, and the air conditioning died with it. And within seconds, the cab began to hold the day's heat like a closed fist. Sweat gathered at her hairline. Naomi did not hurry. She sat a moment with both hands resting on the wheel, the way Elias Whitfield had sat at the end of every long haul for 40 years, letting the engine tick and cool, letting the quiet come. You always park like you're saying grace, her nephew said from the passenger seat, not looking up from his phone, because I am. She reached behind the seat and took down the logbook. The real one, leather worn soft as a Bible cover. Its spine held together now with a rubber band she replaced every few months. She set it on the dash where she could see it. 9 days down. Terence. Tvo. Togo. Then your grandfather's last run is a run he actually finished. Terence Whitfield. Terry, to everyone who was not his aunt when she was making a point. Finally set the phone down. He was 23. A rising second year at the law school, where Naomi had once guest lectured, and he had his grandfather's long hands and his mother's short temper. And he wore both, like he was not yet sure which one he would need first. He'd have hated all the fuss. Terry said he'd have hated the fuss and loved the company. Naomi popped her door. Come on. Your grandmother isn't here to fry us breakfast. So Maybelle's will have to do. She climbed down from the cab, and her boots hit the cracked concrete with a solid, certain thud. 51 years old. Silver coming in at her temples like it had been placed there on purpose. She stood in a plain gray traveling shirt and jeans. And she looked, to anyone passing, like exactly what she wanted to look like. A woman on a long drive, minding her business, owing no one an explanation. Nobody at the Crossroads that morning would have guessed that 11 days earlier, in a marble room 1,000 miles east. This same woman had raised her right hand and been sworn in as a judge of the United States Court of Appeals, one of the most powerful courts in the country. The last stop before the Supreme Court itself. Nobody would have guessed that the confirmation had made the national news, or that it had also made her, for a certain kind of person, a target, enough of one that the United States Marshal Service had quietly assigned her a protective detail she had argued against, and only half accepted. I am burying my father's road, she had told them. Not holding court. Trail me if you have to, but you trail at a distance. This trip is mine. They were trailing now. 2 vehicles, maybe 15 minutes back, giving her the space she had demanded. She could not have known how much those 15 minutes would come to cost. Naomi took in the plaza the way her father had taught her to take in any place before she trusted it. 6 pumps, 3 of them busy. A scatter of rigs along the back lot, their drivers stretching, spitting, checking straps. A low cinder-block building with the words Maybell's Roadhouse painted across the front in letters that had once been read. Tired families shuffling in and out with the particular slow walk of people who had been in a minivan too long. And in the shade at the far edge of the lot, angled so they could watch the pumps without being watched back. 2 county sheriff's cruisers. Nose to tail. She noted them the way you note the weather. Then she went inside to get her nephew some eggs. Maybell smelled like coffee that had been on the burner since dawn, and bacon grease worked so deep into the walls that it had become part of the architecture. A radio behind the counter played something with a fiddle in it. A ceiling fan pushed the hot air around without cooling any of it. It was, in every way that mattered, the kind of place Elias Whitfield had eaten 10,000 breakfasts in. And Naomi felt the ache of him the moment the screen door slapped shut behind her. Sit anywhere that's clean. Hon, called the woman behind the counter. She was round and kind-faced, with a name tag that read Charlene and a strip of tape beneath it where an older word had been peeled away. Which is most of them. I just wiped down. They took a booth by the window, where Naomi could see her truck. Abby, her father's habit. You never turn your back on your rig or your rear view. He used to say, that is where trouble comes from. Behind you. And while you are looking away, Charlene brought coffee without being asked, and took their order with the easy warmth of someone who liked people more than the job, gave her reason to. Terry ordered enough for 2 grown men. Naomi ordered dry toast and grapefruit and enough coffee to float the county. That your rig out there? Charlene asked, tilting her head toward the window. The pretty black one, Lord. My daddy drove. I know a loved truck when I see one. It was my father's, Naomi said. 40 years. I'm finishing a trip for him. Something crossed Charlene's face. The quick, wordless understanding of one grieving daughter meeting another. Then your coffee is on the house, and I don't want to hear a word about it. She glanced toward the window, and the warmth in her face flickered. You watch yourself out there. All right, we get some fellas around here. She did not finish it. She did not have to. She just tipped her chin, almost without meaning to, toward the 2 cruisers in the shade. And then she went to put in the order. Terry watched her go. What was that about? That, Naomi said, wrapping both hands around her coffee, was a woman telling us the truth as gently as she knew how. She looked out at the lot, at the 2 cruisers sitting in the shade like patient dogs. Eat fast. Baby. But won't linger. She should have trusted it more than she did. But she was tired. And she was grieving. And she had spent 30 years believing, as an article of faith, as the thing she had built her entire life around, that the law was a shield that belonged to everyone, She had spent her whole career proving it belonged to people who looked like her too. She was about to be reminded, in a gravel lot off a rural interstate, exactly how heavy that shield gets when the men holding it decide, you do not deserve it. They came for her while she was checking her straps. Naomi had gone back out to the truck after breakfast to walk the trailer. An old freight box she was hauling empty. More ceremony than cargo. Running her hand along each tie-down the way her father had shown her when she was 9 years old and could barely reach them. It was a private thing. That walk. A prayer, she said with her hands. She was halfway down the driver's side when she heard the boots. Well now. The voice arrived before the man did. Dripping with a friendliness so false, it curdled. What have we got here? Deputy Cody Brandt swaggered up between the pumps. Thumbs hooked in his belt. A smirk stamped across a wide, ruddy face that looked like it had never once been told no. He was young and thick through the middle. And he moved like a man who had learned that a badge meant he never had to be the one who backed down. Don't see a lot of lady truckers out this way. Brandt said, letting his eyes travel her up and down. Slow, so she would feel it, especially not. And he let the sentence hang, and smiled, so she would fill in the blank herself. Naomi kept her hand on the tie-down, kept her voice even. Good morning, Deputy. Just walking my trailer. I'll be rolling out shortly. A second set of boots came from the other side. Slower, heavier, measured, like a man who had all the time in the world because he had never once in his life been made to wait. Deputy Wade Kessler came around the front of the truck like a shadow peeling away from the grill. Older than Brandt. Lean, with pale eyes that had gone flat and quiet, the way still water goes quiet. Because something is underneath it, and it is not moving because it does not have to. Where Brandt performed his contempt, Kessler simply carried his. The way other men carry keys. This is a plaza, not a parking lot, Kessler said. No greeting. How long you been loitering out here? I'm not loitering. I had breakfast. And I'm checking my equipment before I drive. Both legal. Last I checked. Last you checked. Kessler repeated the words softly, as if turning them over in his hand, looking for defects. He drifted around behind her while Brandt stayed in front, and Naomi felt the geometry of it close around her. One man in her sightline, one man at her back, and 30 years in courtrooms told her exactly what she was looking at. Textbook. A box built out of 2 men and a uniform, designed to make a person feel that the ground had tilted, and that only obedience would set it right again. Checking your equipment, Brandt said, and snorted. That what we're calling it. You sure you're not running something out of this truck? We've been seeing a lot of activity through here lately. Wrong kind of people. Wrong kind of loads. A knot of travelers had begun to gather at the edge of the pumps. A father with a gas nozzle frozen in his hand. 2 teenagers. An old man who had stopped mid-step. Naomi saw a young woman near the ice machine lift her phone. Angle it and hold it steady. Good, Naomi thought. Film it. Film all of it. My paperwork is in order, she said, and her voice carried now. Pitched, so the whole crowd could hear every syllable. She reached slowly into her breast pocket and produced her commercial driver's license, holding it out flat on her palm. You are welcome to run it. Oh. Kessler came back around into her sightline. He did not take the license. He looked at it, the way you look at a thing you have already decided is a forgery. We'll run it. And then it happened the way it would happen 10,000 times on 10,000 screens over the days that followed. Cody Brandt's patience, what little of it he owned, ran out all at once. Since when? He said. and the false friendliness fell off him like a mask that had gotten too heavy to hold. Do we let animals sit behind the wheel of a luxury rig? Get your black ass out of the cab before I drag you down myself. He surged forward and drove her backward with the flat of both hands until her spine slammed hard against the metal trailer, the whole box booming like a struck drum. And he reached past the license entirely. And he seized her father's leather logbook out of her hand. And with one contemptuous jerk, he ripped the cover half off its spine. 40 years of a dead man's careful handwriting. Torn in the sun, in front of a crowd. Look at her shaking. Brandt crowed, holding the wounded book up like a trophy. Fancy truck. But still, just a dirty, uneducated thief. Naomi was not shaking. That was the thing the video would show. Later, to anyone who looked closely, her hands were perfectly still. What Brandt read as fear was something else entirely. Something as cold and level as a courtroom, the instant before a verdict is read. And he was too small to know the difference. She opened her mouth to speak. And Wade Kessler moved. He lunged into her space, close enough that she could smell the coffee and the certainty on his breath. And he drove a low, ugly stream of words directly into her face. And with a violent twist of both hands, he cranked her right arm up behind her back until the tendons screamed, forcing the steel cuffs down over her wrist until the metal ground against the small bones. Then he took the coffee cup off the fender where she had set it, the coffee Charlene had poured her for free, and he hurled it down onto her boots, the hot liquid soaking through to her feet. "You're trash." "Girl," Kessler said. So close, his lips nearly touched her ear. "People like you don't talk back to a badge. Enjoy the dirt." Her father's logbook lay in the gravel where Brandt had flung it. Cover torn. Pages splayed to the sky. And Wade Kessler, without once breaking eye contact, set the heel of his boot on it and pressed down. Slow, grinding the paper into the wet stone. And the sound it made, the soft ruin of old ink pressed into gravel, was the loudest thing Naomi Whitfield had ever heard in her life. "You're hurting my arm," she said. Loud, clear, deliberate. Every word placed for the phones. "I am not resisting. I am telling you, on the record, that you are hurting my arm, and that I have done nothing wrong." "She's resisting," Kessler announced to the lot, to the cameras, to the God he did not believe was watching. "Y'all see it, always gotta make it difficult. Every single time. Your kind can never just do the simple thing." There it was. 2 words. "Your kind," said in the open, in the daylight, into a dozen recording phones, by a man so certain of his own impunity that he did not even bother to lower his voice. They put her face down over the hot hood of her father's truck. The metal seared her cheek, and through it all, one part of Naomi Whitfield stayed as calm and as clear as still water, and did the only thing 30 years had trained her to do. It began, very quietly, to build the record. Deputy Wade Kessler, Deputy Cody Brandt, the badge numbers, memorized, the words, near verbatim. She filed each fact away in the cool, orderly place inside her that no heel had ever reached and no man with a badge had ever once been able to touch. She could have stopped it. That was the thing that would haunt Wade Kessler for the rest of his natural life. Once he finally understood it, not that she could not have fought. That never entered her mind. She was 51 and unarmed and outnumbered and black in a rural county. And fighting was simply a way to die. What would haunt him was subtler And far worse, she could have stopped the whole thing with a single sentence. 6 words. I am a federal appeals judge. 6 words that would have turned the entire lot inside out. She did not say them. Part of it was strategy. The record was cleaner. The truth was purer. If it surfaced on its own, and not from her own mouth as a threat. But most of it was older and harder than strategy. And she would only ever admit it to herself. She wanted to know. She had spent her whole life on the inside of the law, cushioned by titles and robes and the deference they bought. She wanted, just once, in the worst way, to feel what the law felt like from underneath, the way it had felt to her father 1,000 times on 1,000 shoulders of the road, the way it feels every single day to people who will never in their lives have 6 magic words to say. Now she knew. It felt like a hot hood against your cheek, and a stranger's heel on your father's life, and 2 words hanging in the summer air like smoke that would not clear. Terry, she said, twisting her head until she could find him. Terence, look at me. Her nephew had come out of the diner at a dead run when the noise of the crowd reached him, and he had pulled up short 10 feet away. Phone already up and recording. His whole young body vibrating with the specific and dangerous rage of a man watching someone he loves get hurt and knowing that the wrong move will only make it worse. Get off her, Terry shouted. She hasn't done anything. You can't just get your hands off her. Terence. Naomi's voice cut clean through his. Low and absolute. A voice that had brought federal prosecutors to heel across a courtroom. Do not move. Do not raise your voice. Keep that camera up. Keep it steady. And do not stop recording for any reason. You hear me. You are my witness. That is your only job right now. Be my witness. Nothing else. He heard her. Barely. His hands were shaking. But he kept the phone up. God bless the boy. He kept it up, that the boyfriend Brant jeered. You want some too. That is my nephew. Naomi said. He is a law student, and he is recording a federal civil rights violation in progress. Kessler paused at that. Just a flicker. The smallest hitch in his certainty. The way a man pauses when a word he does not like brushes past him in the dark. Federal. Then he shook it off. Because men like Wade Kessler had learned that words like that were what people said when they had nothing left to say. And he had heard them from 100 people he had processed and forgotten. Book smart, he said, and smiled. Well, let's see how far book smart gets you out here. They marched her toward the cruiser. Brant shoved her into the back seat harder than gravity required. And her temple caught the edge of the door frame, and a thin line of blood started at her hairline and ran down toward her jaw. In the passenger seat, Brant kept twisting around to look at her, to make sure she watched him enjoy it. Bet you're not so mighty now, he said. Bet that fancy truck feels real far away. Naomi Whitfield said nothing. She looked out the window as they pulled out of the crossroads. And she watched Charlene the waitress, standing frozen in the doorway of Maybelle's, with a dish towel pressed to her mouth. And she watched the young woman by the ice machine still filming. And she watched her nephew sprinting alongside the cruiser, shouting a badge number into his phone. And she watched. Last of all, her father's torn logbook lying open in the gravel where a stranger's boot had left it. She memorized that too. It was, after all, what she had trained her whole life to do. 15 minutes back down the interstate, 2 dark government vehicles came off an on-ramp and found the crossroads empty of the black Kenworth they had been trailing. And the check-in call that should have come at the top of the hour did not come. And a woman named Renata Ford, riding in the lead vehicle, felt the back of her neck go cold. The Kershaw County Sheriff's Station squatted at the end of a side street, a low brick building the color of a scab, and they walked her in through a rear door into a booking room that smelled of bleach, laid over something the bleach could not reach. "Name," said the desk sergeant, not looking up. "His tag," read Delroy. He had the gray, doughy look of a man who had processed too many people and cared about none of them. Naomi Whitfield. She gave it plain and clear. She was done. Now, being anyone but exactly who she was, her judicial identification was in her jacket. Of course, a laminated card that would have ended this in a single heartbeat. But the jacket was in the truck. And the truck was back at the crossroads. And she had already made her choice about the 6 words. So she gave them her name, her real name, and nothing else. And she watched to see what the machine would do with a black woman who would not beg. Occupation. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. "I'm in public service." That a fact. Kessler had come in behind her. And now he leaned against the counter, studying her face with those flat, pale eyes. "You don't look like public service to me. You look like trouble that thinks it's clever." He let a silence stretch out. And then he did the thing that told Naomi exactly how far these men intended to go. He smiled. "Here's what's going to happen. Miss Public Service, you resisted. You destroyed department property. You assaulted an officer with a vehicle when you pushed off that trailer. That's 3 felonies before lunch. And out here my word builds the mountain, and your word doesn't move a single stone of it. By the time anybody who cares about you finds out where you are, you'll be looking at years. Not days. Years. Put her in holding," he told Delroy. "By herself and Delroy." And he lowered his voice. "But not enough. Never quite enough. Because men like Kessler have a physical need to be heard being cruel. The cameras in that back hall have been giving us fits all week. Real, unreliable equipment. You would hardly trust the footage they get. If they get any." Delroy's pen paused over the form. For just a second, something moved behind his gray face. Not conscience, exactly, but the animal caution of a man who has felt the wind change. "Wade," he said quietly. "You sure about this one? You questioning me now, too?" "No." "Sir." The pen moved again. "No." They put her in a holding cell the size of a closet. 1 steel bench. 1 narrow window near the ceiling. Weeping, a single blade of dusty light across the concrete. Cody Brandt shoved her in hard enough that she had to catch herself on the bench, her cuffed hands wrenching behind her. And she bit down on the sound she wanted to make. "Enjoy your stay, Your Highness." Brandt sneered and slammed the door, and the clang of it rolled down the empty hall like a dropped pan. Naomi sat down on the steel bench. She made herself breathe, slow through the nose. Then she did what she had been trained across 3 decades to do. She began, very quietly, in the cool and orderly place inside her, to build the record. It was 1:52 in the afternoon. Kershaw County, Deputy Wade Kessler. Badge number. Held. Deputy Cody Brandt. Badge number. Held. Desk Sergeant Delroy. Surname. Unknown. A statement by Kessler at booking, in front of a witness, indicating deliberate interference with recording equipment. Near verbatim. She laid it out like a brief, clean, and numbered. And the laying out of it was the very thing that kept her steady. Because as long as she was building the record, she was still, in the deepest part of herself, a judge. And no closet could take that from her. And no heel could grind it into gravel. And she thought about her father. Elias Whitfield had been pulled over more times than he could count on a hand with fingers to spare. He had been made to sit on curbs in the cold. He had had his cab torn apart by men looking for something that was never there, and then been left to put it all back together himself while they laughed. He had been called boy at 60 years old by deputies half his age, and he had come home from every one of those roads. And he had sat at the kitchen table, and he had looked at his daughter, who was 15, who was furious, who wanted to burn the whole country to the ground. And he had said the thing he always said: "They can take an hour of my day, Naomi. They can take my dignity, but only if I hand it to them. And I am not going to hand it to them. But they cannot take what I know, and what I know is that I did nothing wrong. You hold on to that. Whatever they do to you, you hold on to the truth of what you did and did not do, because that is the one thing in this world that is yours and God's. And no man with a badge or a rope has ever once been able to touch it." She had seen it happen once, with her own eyes, really seen it, up close, the way a child sees a thing and then carries it whole into every year that comes after. She was 11, riding shotgun on a summer hall, her legs not long enough to reach the floor of the cab, drunk on the pure privilege of being allowed to come along, somewhere in the flat middle of a flat state. A cruiser lit them up for nothing, for a taillight that worked fine, though they would claim otherwise. A taillight that worked fine before and worked fine after, and she had watched her enormous, gentle father, a man who could throw 100-pound load like it was a pillow, fold himself down small, and keep both hands high on the wheel where they could be seen, and answer "yes, sir," and "no, sir," in a voice sanded flat of everything that made it his, to a deputy younger than some of his own boots. She had watched them make him step out, watched them go through the cab, her adventure, pulling out the atlas and the thermos and the little bag of butterscotch he kept just for her, and dropping it all in the dirt. Watched one of them pick up a drawing she had made him, a crayon truck with Whitfield lettered on the door. Look at it, and let it fall face down in the gravel. Bored. Because to him, it was nothing, and she had watched her father say "yes, sir" to that too. Back on the road. An hour of their day, simply gone. She had cried furious 11-year-old tears, and asked him why he let them. Why he did not say something. He was so much bigger, and he had reached over and put one big hand on the back of her neck the way he did. And he had said, "Low and easy, because I am bringing you home tonight. Baby, that is the only thing I said yes to. I said yes to bringing you home, and then, softer. They got an hour. They got the butterscotch. They did not get your daddy. You understand the difference. As long as you understand the difference, they never win. They only delay." She had picked that crayon drawing up off the floor of the cab herself. It was creased down the middle forever. After the blink, he kept it, creased, on the sun visor of every truck he drove for the next 30 years. It was on the visor of this one, 6 inches above her head. At that very moment, back at the crossroads, she had gone to law school for him. She had told him so once. Near the very end, in the hospital where the machines did their patient counting. "I went for you, Daddy, so there would be one of us on the inside." So the next Elias Whitfield gets pulled over, and there is somebody up in the rafters of this whole thing who remembers exactly what it felt like down on the curb, and he had squeezed her hand with what strength he had left, and he had said, "Then you already won. Baby, whatever else happens, you already won." Naomi Whitfield sat in a holding cell in Kershaw County, with blood drying on her temple and steel biting her wrists. And she did not weep, and she did not beg, and she did not say the 6 words. She held on to the truth of what she had done and had not done. She held on to her father, and 1,000 feet away, in a records room, Deputy Cody Brandt sat down at a terminal and began, Jumsile, to delete a security file, while down the hall, a very young deputy named Isaiah Pruitt watched him do it through a glass partition and felt the floor of his entire life begin to give way beneath him. Isaiah Pruitt was 24 years old and 8 months on the job, and he had wanted to be a sheriff's deputy since he was 6, and he was about to find out what he was actually made of. He had been at the station when they brought her in. He had seen the blood on her temple and the way she carried herself, not like a criminal, he had thought, not like anyone he had ever processed, but like a schoolteacher who had walked into the wrong room and was waiting, patiently, for the mistake to correct itself. He had heard Kessler's crack about the cameras. He had heard the door slam, and now he was watching Cody Brandt hunch over a keyboard deleting the plaza footage that Isaiah himself had helped pull off the county's shared server not 2 hours before. And every alarm his mother and his church and his own plain decency had ever installed in him was going off at once. He had grown up in this county, black on his mother's side, and old enough now to understand exactly what that had always meant and would always mean. In the back rooms of this particular building, he had joined up telling himself he would be the difference, that he would be the good one, that he would change it from the inside. He was about to learn that changing it from the inside means, at some point, a moment exactly like this one, a moment where being the good one stops being a feeling and starts being a choice with a cost. He waited until Brandt lumbered off toward the break room. Then he sat down at the terminal, and his hands were shaking, and he looked at what Brandt had done. The local copy was gone. Brandt had deleted the local copy. Feeling clever, Isaiah Pruitt was the one who had uploaded that footage to the county's cloud backup that morning. Standard procedure, a procedure that no one like Wade Kessler had ever bothered to learn. Because men like Kessler believed the building was theirs and the rules were for other people. The backup was still there, untouched, time-stamped. The whole thing. Kessler's heel on the logbook. The coffee poured out on her boots. The words, "You're kind." The cuffs cranked past cruelty. All of it. In county-issued high definition, Isaiah copied it to a drive. He put the drive in his sock, which was a foolish place. And he knew it was a foolish place. And he put it there anyway because his hands did not know what else to do with it. Then he sat very still and tried to work out who in the whole rotten world he could possibly call, not the sheriff. Sheriff Earl Doggett had been running Kershaw County for 19 years. And there was not a complaint that ever came in about Wade Kessler that did not find its way into Earl Doggett's bottom drawer and stay there. Not the county attorney, who fished with Doggett every Sunday. Not the state. Because the state took weeks. And Isaiah had heard the thing Kessler said to the desk sergeant. And Isaiah understood, with a cold certainty, that whatever was going to happen to the woman in that cell, it was meant to happen before weeks could ever pass. Meanwhile, out beyond the county line, the one thing Wade Kessler could not delete was already loose in the world. And it was moving faster than any man alive could stop it. The young woman from the ice machine had posted her video before Naomi's cruiser had even reached the station. Cops assault black woman trucker at a rest stop for nothing. She wrote, she was just checking her truck. Kershaw County. Share this. Terry had posted his closer, clearer, with the badge numbers read aloud in his shaking voice, and the 2 words "your kind" captured so cleanly there could be no argument about them. Charlene, the waitress, who had never in her life posted anything more controversial than a photo of a pie, got on her own account and wrote, simply, "I served that woman breakfast this morning. She was grieving her daddy. What they did to her in my parking lot was a sin, and I will testify to it in any court in this land." By 2 o'clock, the videos had 100,000 views. By 2:30, they had 500,000. And a national civil rights organization had shared them, and a reporter in the state capitol had started making calls, and the words Kershaw County were climbing every trending list in the country. And somewhere in a federal building, a very specific set of people were watching a very specific judge's protective detail report that they had lost all contact with their principal, and they were putting those two facts side by side with the cold, fast precision of people whose entire job is exactly that. But Isaiah Pruitt did not know any of that yet. Isaiah Pruitt only knew what was in his sock, and what was down the hall, and what it was going to cost him. He got up. He walked down the scab brick hallway to the holding cells, past the dark camera that Kessler had bragged about, and he stopped outside the closet of a cell where the woman sat very straight on a steel bench with dried blood on her temple. He had a water bottle in one hand, and in his chest, the whole crushing weight of a decision. "Mom," he said quietly, through the bars, "my name is Deputy Pruitt, Isaiah Pruitt." He glanced back down the empty hall, then crouched so they were eye to eye. "I got you some water, and I need you to listen to me real careful, because I do not have but a couple of minutes." Naomi looked at him. She saw a young man the age of her nephew, in a uniform that had done her real harm, with terror and decency wrestling openly across his face. She had spent 30 years reading faces from a bench. She read this one in about a second and a half. "I'm listening." "Deputy Pruitt," she said gently. "They deleted the parking lot footage. Brandt did it, but I—" And his voice dropped so low, she had to lean into the bars to catch it. "I backed the whole thing up this morning. It is on the county cloud, time-stamped, and I have got a copy on me right now." He did not say where. "I do not know who to trust in this building. Mom, I truly do not. But I know what I saw in that video, and I know it was wrong. And I am not going to let them bury it. I just—" And his composure cracked. Just for an instant. All 8 months of it, showing through at once. I don't know who to call. And Naomi Whitfield, sitting in a closet with her hands cuffed behind her, felt something rise up in her chest that was not quite hope and was somehow stronger than hope. She had spent her whole career trying to build a system in which a young man exactly like this one, standing at a moment exactly like this one, would have somewhere to turn. And here he was, and she was going to be his somewhere. "Deputy Pruitt," she said, and her voice was steady and warm and absolutely certain. The voice of a woman who had just remembered, all the way down to the floor of herself, exactly who she was. "I am going to give you a name and a number, and when you call it, you will identify yourself by badge, and then you will say 5 words. And everything that happens after those 5 words is going to happen very fast. Do you have somewhere private you can call from?" "The equipment room. Nobody goes in there but me." "Good. Get a pen." He got a pen. "The name is Deputy United States Marshal Renata Ford." Naomi recited a number from memory, slow, twice, and watched him write it down with a hand that was steadier now, because a person with a task is always steadier than a person with only fear. When she answers, you give her your badge and your location, and then you tell her 5 words. Naomi held his eyes through the bars. I have located Judge Whitfield. Isaiah Pruitt stared at her. The pen stopped moving on the page. Judge? He said. United States Court of Appeals. Naomi said quietly. Sworn in 11 days ago. There are 2 vehicles full of very serious federal officers, somewhere within an hour of this building, who have lost contact with me. And who are, I promise you, extremely unhappy about it. You are about to make them very happy. And you are about to be the reason this county's whole history changes course. Now go. Deputy. And Isaiah. He had already half risen. And he stopped. Thank you. What you are doing right now is the single hardest thing a person in your position can do. I have watched a great many people fail this exact test. You are passing it. You remember that. Whatever comes. Isaiah Pruitt went down the hall to the equipment room on legs that did not feel like his own. And he closed the door. And he dialed the number. And when a crisp voice answered on the second ring, he said his badge and his location, and then, in a voice he barely recognized as his own, he said the 5 words that split the whole afternoon clean. In 11 minutes later, the first of the black vehicles turned onto the side street. Sheriff Earl Doggett was on the phone with the county attorney, working out how they were going to characterize the incident, when his office window went dark. Not dark like a cloud. Dark like something enormous had pulled up outside and blocked the sun. He looked up in the middle of a sentence, and he saw them. And the phone slid halfway down from his ear. They came in a column. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 black Suburbans. Government plates. Rolling into his little gravel lot in a tight, practiced line and stopping all at once, nose to tail, boxing in every cruiser in the yard so that not one of them could have pulled out if the whole building were on fire. The doors opened in the same instant. The way doors only open when the people behind them have done this 1,000 times. And out came the windbreakers. Dark blue. 3 letters across the back in gold that Earl Doggett could read from behind his own desk. And that turned his stomach to water. United States Marshal. 12 of them. Then more behind. Moving with the unhurried. Total confidence of people who do not have to raise their voices. Because everyone already understands. And behind them, at the mouth of the side street, the other thing was already arriving. The first news van. Satellite mast climbing into the afternoon sky. Then a second. Then a knot of people from the town, drawn by the videos. By the word that had gone through the county like fire through dry grass. Standing at the tape, a deputy had not even thought to string yet. Holding up their phones. Whatever happened in the next 10 minutes was going to happen in front of the entire watching world. At the front of the column walked a black woman in her 40s. Close-cropped hair. A badge on a chain against her chest. And an expression like a closed steel door. Deputy United States Marshal Renata Ford. 16 years protecting federal judges. She had argued against letting Judge Whitfield make this trip with a light detail. She had lost her principal signal an hour and 40 minutes ago. And she had been running the worst cases a human being can run through her mind for every single one of those minutes. And she was. Right now. Exactly one wrong answer, away from taking this building apart brick by scab-colored brick. She came through the front doors without knocking. The little bell over the door jingled. Absurdly. Into the silence. "Who is in charge here?" she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Delroy, the desk sergeant, half rose. "Mom, this is a county matter. We're in the middle of... I know exactly what this is. Ford set a credential down on the counter without looking at it, her eyes already sweeping the room, the hallway, the doors. Deputy United States Marshal Renata Ford. I have reason to believe that a judge of the United States Court of Appeals is being held in this facility, off protocol, and possibly against her will. You are going to take me to her right now. You are going to do it in the next 60 seconds. Or every single person who slows me down is going to spend tonight explaining himself to the United States Attorney. On the record, under oath. Where is she? The word judge went through the station like a live current through standing water. Cody Brandt, coming out of the break room with a can of soda, stopped so hard he sloshed it down his own shirt. Sheriff Earl Doggett appeared in his office doorway, with his phone still in his hand. The county attorney's voice still leaking out of it, tiny and unaware, and the color running out of Doggett's face in real time, like water out of a cracked glass. And Wade Kessler. Wade Kessler came around the corner from the records room, and for 1 second, 1 single second, the flat, pale certainty that had ridden that man's face his entire life stayed right where it was, because his brain had not yet caught up to his eyes. Then it caught up. They're a problem, Marshal Kessler said, and his voice cracked open on the second word. And every human being in that room heard it break. Renata Ford turned and looked at him the way you look at something you have found on the bottom of your shoe. You will know shortly. She turned back to Delroy. That 60 seconds is now 40. It was young Isaiah Pruitt who stepped forward, chin up, terrified and clear as a bell. This way. Ma'am. She's in holding back hall. I will take you myself. They went down the scab brick hallway in a moving wall. Ford in front, Pruitt at her shoulder. 6 marshals filling the corridor behind them, past the dark camera that Kessler had bragged about. And Ford's jaw tightened when she saw it dark. And she said, to no one and to everyone, note that camera. And one of her people made a note. At the last cell she stopped. Naomi Whitfield was sitting on the steel bench, exactly as she had been for 2 hours, her back straight as a plumb line, dried blood at her temple, her hands still cuffed behind her. She looked up. She saw Renata Ford's face on the other side of the bars, and for the first time in 2 hours, something in her let go. Not much, just at the corners of her eyes, just a fraction. Marshal Ford, she said, you made good time. Your Honor. Ford's voice did something complicated then. Relief and fury and apology, all fighting for the same breath. Are you injured? I'm all right. It looks a great deal worse than it is. Naomi rose to her feet. Get these off me. Please. And Marshal. She nodded down the hall, toward the front of the station where the deputies stood, frozen in place. I would like to walk out of here on my own 2 feet. Through the front. Past them. I think that matters. I think it matters more than almost anything else that is going to happen today. Yes. Ma'am. The keys came. A marshal unlocked the cuffs. Gently. And Naomi rolled her shoulders once and rubbed her wrists where the steel had left its deep red rings. And she stepped out of the closet where 2 men had put her because they believed she was a black woman with a nice truck and nobody on earth to call. And she walked up the hall, slow, unhurried, every eye in the building on her. And beyond the doors, every camera in the county. Wade Kessler was still standing where his certainty had left him. Now hold on, he said, and the words came out unspooling. Thin. A man grabbing at anything as the floor tilts. Hold on. Nobody said anything about a judge. She never said she was any judge. She gave a false occupation. She was uncooperative. She resisted. She pushed off that trailer. We followed procedure. Naomi Whitfield stopped in front of him. She did not gloat. That was the thing that undid Wade Kessler more completely than any shouting on this earth could have. She simply looked at him. Close. Level. With the so bone-tired of seeing it walk back into her courtroom wearing a different face. You didn't do this to a judge. Deputy Kessler, she said. And she said it quietly. So quietly that every person in that station leaned in to hear it. And every microphone strained toward it. That is the story you are going to tell yourself tonight. And for a long time after. And it is the lie that is going to eat you alive from the inside out. You did not do it to a judge. You did it to a woman. To a driver. To somebody's daughter. Checking her straps. Minding her own road. Hurting. No living soul. The badge on my hip changes exactly one thing. It changes what happens to you. It does not change one single thing about what you did. Or who you were willing to do it to when you believed the cameras were off and nobody who mattered would ever come asking. She let that land. All the way down. You had no idea who I was. And you did it anyway. That is the whole story. Deputy. That was always the whole story. And now the whole country is going to hear it. Then Naomi Whitfield walked out through the front doors of the Kershaw County Sheriff's Station. On her own 2 feet. Into the hard afternoon light. Into the ring of gold-lettered marshals and the wall of cameras and the beginning of a reckoning 19 years in the making. And behind her, in a scab-brick hallway, Wade Kessler stood with the floor of his whole life gone out from under him, understanding, for the very first time, that the worst thing he had ever done, he had done not to a judge, but to a person he had decided did not matter. And out at the crossroads, by the 4th pump, her father's torn logbook still lay open to the sky. But it would not lie there much longer. Someone was already driving out to bring it home. The thing about the truth, Elias Whitfield used to say, is that it keeps. You can bury it. You can grind it into the gravel with your heel. But it keeps, and it comes up. And when it comes up all at once. It came up all at once. By that evening, the videos from the crossroads had been seen by millions. And now they carried a second headline, stacked on top of the first. The woman in them was a federal appellate judge, and she had been assaulted and falsely jailed by a county sheriff's department that had then tried to erase the evidence. The story detonated. It was the lead on every network by the 10 o'clock news. Federal judge beaten and jailed by deputies who had no idea who she was. And underneath the shock of the reveal ran a second current, deeper and truer, that the best of the coverage refused to let go of. If they did this to a judge, what in God's name do they do? Every single day. To the people who are not. That was the question Naomi Whitfield wanted asked. In the end, it was the only thing she truly cared about seeing asked. The consequences came in order. And they came like a hammer. Wade Kessler and Cody Brandt were stripped of badge and service weapon and placed on unpaid leave within 12 hours. And then the thing that Naomi's entire life had been built to make possible happened. The United States Department of Justice opened a federal criminal civil rights case before the week was out. The charge had a cold and beautiful precision to it, a phrase Naomi had read in 100 court opinions and never once expected to see, aimed at the men who had cuffed her. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Title 18. Section 2. 42 of the United States Code. It means using the power of a badge to strip a person of the very rights that badge is sworn to protect. It is one of the oldest civil rights laws in the country. It was written more than a century ago for exactly this, for men exactly like these, and Cody Brandt, facing the footage he had failed to erase, facing the obstruction charge for trying, and staring straight over the cliff edge of a federal prison term, did what men like Brandt always do. The moment the man above them goes down, he talked. He talked about Kessler. He talked about the traffic stops, the ones that never made it into any report. And when the investigators knew exactly which drawer to ask him about, he talked about Sheriff Earl Doggett, because Wade Kessler had a history. Of course he did. Men like Wade Kessler always have a history. The only variable in the whole equation is whether anyone with power ever gets to see it. There had been complaints. Years of them. Dozens of them. From black drivers and Latino families and a disabled veteran and a 19-year-old kid left on a curb in January until his hands went white, and every single one of those complaints had gone into Sheriff Earl Doggett's bottom drawer and died there, in the dark. That drawer was now federal evidence. And Earl Doggett, 19 years, the untouchable king of Kershaw County, was under criminal investigation himself for the systematic burial of misconduct complaints, and by autumn he had resigned in open disgrace, with the state attorney general's people going through his files one page at a time. And here is where the story stopped being about three cruel men and became about the thing Naomi Whitfield believed in far more than she believed in punishing anyone, because the Department of Justice did not stop at Kessler and Brandt and Doggett. Pushed by the footage, by the buried complaints drawer, by the sheer number of people who came forward the moment they saw that coming forward was finally safe. The Civil Rights Division opened what is called a pattern or practice investigation into the entire Kershaw County Sheriff's Department, an inquiry not into three men, but into a system, its training, its hiring, its supervision, the whole rotten culture that had let a Wade Kessler grind a dead man's logbook into the gravel and calmly expect nothing to ever come of it. That kind of investigation does not put a man in a cell. It does something rarer, and something Naomi considered far more important. It changes the machine itself, so that the machine stops producing the same wound, over and over and over, on people who will never have a convoy of marshals coming to speak for them, and they came forward. That was the part that finally broke Naomi's composure. The one time it broke. Not the cuffs, not the hood, not the heel on the logbook. This, once the world had watched a person stand against Wade Kessler and not be destroyed. The ones who had stood alone for years and lost began, one at a time, to raise their hands. The disabled veteran who had filed a complaint that died in a drawer, and who had spent 3 years quietly believing that the silence meant he must have imagined how bad it truly was. The family whose father had been detained on a broken taillight, stop that somehow stretched to 4 hours, whose children still flinched at the sight of a cruiser. The 19-year-old, a grown man now, working 2 jobs, who had never told a living soul what happened to him on the shoulder of Route 9. Because who would he even have told? And who now sat across a table from a federal investigator and said all of it in a flat, quiet voice, and heard at the end the words no one in a uniform had ever once said to him, "I believe you." And it is on the record now. It is real now. Naomi read every one of their statements when the case file became public. She read them at her own kitchen table. Late. Alone. And somewhere around the veteran's account, she set the pages down. And she put her hand over her mouth. and she let herself, for exactly 2 minutes, be not a judge but a daughter, because every single one of these was her father, on some other road, on some other night, with no one up in the rafters to remember him. This was what the drawer had held. Not paperwork. People. Whole years of people. Filed away in the dark by a man who fished on Sundays. This is why, she thought. This is the whole why. Not so that it never happens to a judge again, so that it stops happening to them. But there was one thing Naomi Whitfield flatly refused to do, and it told you everything you would ever need to know about her. She would not preside over any of it. She could not. Of course, the ethics were plain, and she was the very last person on this earth who would bend them a single degree. But even setting the rules entirely aside, she would not have wanted to. And so when Wade Kessler and Cody Brandt finally stood trial, the judge on that bench was some other judge, in some other courtroom, and Naomi Whitfield sat where her father had sat 1,000 times in his life. In the gallery, on the outside, one more citizen among many, watching the law do the thing it is supposed to do, and praying it would do it right. The trial was swift, because the truth was on video, and the truth does not stammer. The jury was out for less than a day, and on the morning the verdicts came in. The courtroom was so full that people stood along the back wall, and among them stood the veteran, and the family from the taillight stop, and the young man from Route 9, and Charlene the waitress, who had driven 3 hours and worn her church clothes. And they heard the word, twice, in the flat formal music of the law, guilty. And then, from the other judge on the high bench, the sentence, read out into a silence so complete you could hear the old building settle. Years, real years. For each of them, Wade Kessler did not look like a king when they read it. He looked like exactly what he had always been underneath the badge, a small man who had mistaken the fear of others for his own size. Hearing at last that the one thing he had believed could never touch him had touched him after all. There was a moment, before it was over, when the presiding judge, following the law, asked whether anyone wished to be heard. And there was a stir, and heads turned, because everyone in that room knew who was sitting quietly in the third row of the gallery. Everyone knew that the woman these men had beaten and jailed was herself one of the most powerful judges in the nation, and that if any voice on earth had earned the right to fill that silence, it was hers. Naomi Whitfield rose, but she did not go to the microphone as a judge. She would not permit herself that. Not here. Not ever. She went as a daughter, as a driver, as one more of the people, and she spoke for less than a minute. And she never once raised her voice. And in that packed and breathless courtroom, you could have heard a pin drop onto the floor. I am not here as a judge today, she said. A judge would be the wrong thing to be. In this room, on this morning, I'm here as Elias Whitfield's daughter. My father drove a truck for 40 years. He was a gentleman, and a good one. And he was stopped, and searched, and made small, more times on the roads of this country than either of us could ever count. He came home from every one of those nights, and he told me the same thing, that they could take an hour of his day, and they could never take the truth of who he was. He was right about the second part. He was too kind to say the first part out loud. So I will say it for him now. They took a great deal more than an hour. They took years. From him. And from every person standing along that wall. And from thousands you will never see and never hear, who had no camera, and no witness, and no one to call. She paused, and she let her eyes move. Slow. Across the gallery. Across all of them. The two men at that table will answer for what they did to me. I am grateful for that. But I want to be very clear about something, so that no one mistakes the meaning of this day. This is not justice because it happened to a judge. It is justice because it should not have happened to anyone. And it will not be finished. It will not be 1 inch finished until it stops happening to the people in this country who are not judges, and who never will be, and who deserve to walk to their own trucks in the sunlight, unafraid, exactly as much as I do. She was quiet for a moment. That is all I came to say. Thank you. She sat back down, and in the gallery of that courtroom, on be one, the people rose to their feet. The veteran first, and then the family, and then the young man from Route 9, and then all of them. And they did not cheer, because it was not that kind of moment. They simply stood for her, and for her father, and for every name that had ever died quietly in the bottom of a drawer. It came down slow. Naomi told Renata Ford afterward, on the courthouse steps, in the cold, clean light. Too slow for my father. Too slow for a great many people who will never get a convoy to speak for them. But it came down, and now we make it come down faster. And for everybody. Next time, there were smaller justices too. The quiet kind that never make a single headline but make a whole life. The young woman from the ice machine, whose shaking phone had started all of it, was flown to the Capitol to give her statement, and she came home changed. Taller somehow. A person who had learned in her bones that a bystander with a camera and the plain nerve to keep it raised is not powerless at all. Charlene testified to the state and to the federal investigators and to anyone who would sit still long enough to listen, with a steadiness that surprised everyone but Naomi, who had recognized her the very first morning as a woman who told the truth as a matter of habit, and Deputy Isaiah Pruitt, who had backed up a file no one thought to protect, and then made the hardest phone call of his young life, paid for it. At first, exactly the way people who break ranks always pay. The old guard froze him out. His hours went strange. A tire went flat that had never been anywhere near a nail. But the pattern or practice investigators knew his name, and they knew precisely what he had done. And when the new sheriff came in, a reformer, an outsider, installed with federal eyes, watching every move he made. The very first phone call the new administration placed about promotions was to a young deputy who had proven, at the exact moment it counted, and cost the most, precisely what he was made of. Sergeant Pruitt kept a printout of the 5 words he had said on the phone that day, framed on the wall of his small office, where he could see it every morning. For the rest of his career, Naomi made certain of that promotion. It was, perhaps, the only string she pulled in the entire affair, and she did not consider it a favor. She considered it an investment in the single thing that had actually worked inside a broken building. A young man's conscience, and his willingness to act on it alone, in the dark, when looking away would have been so very much easier. She did not go back to work right away. The court gave her leave, and the country gave her a title she had never asked for. The judge from the video, the face of a moment, and reporters camped on her street hoping for a quote she would not give. She let them speculate. She had, as her father used to say, work to do. The first thing she did was drive back to Kershaw County. She went to the crossroads. She went to Maybell's. She sat in the same booth by the window. And Charlene came out from behind the counter. And the two women held on to each other for a long time without saying very much, because there was not much that needed saying between them. Then Charlene reached under the counter and brought out something wrapped in a clean dish towel and set it on the table as gently as you would set down a sleeping child. Her father's logbook. One of the boys brought it in the next morning, Charlene said, her eyes wet. Off the ground out there. I dried it out best I could. Horn. But I won't lie to you. It's rough. Some of those pages, the ones that got the worst of it. She trailed off. Naomi unwrapped it. It was rough. The cover was cracked and torn where Brandt had ripped it. The pages that had taken the heel and the wet gravel were buckled and blurred. Some of the ink run down into gray ghosts of itself. 40 years of her father's hand. Wounded, but it kept. That was the thing. Most of it kept. She turned to the last entry. The final page, Elias Whitfield had written, before the cancer took the road away from him for good. The ink there was untouched, because that page had folded under and been protected. When the book fell, his handwriting, shaky by then, but his, unmistakably his, one more run left in me. West. All the way west. Until the road runs out at the water. Always meant to drive till I could smell the ocean. Naomi says she will take me when I am stronger. Lord willing. He had not gotten stronger. Naomi had promised him the ocean. In a hospital room. Holding a hand that had held a wheel for 40 years. And she had not been able to keep that promise while he was still alive to see it kept. She was keeping it now, 2 days out. Daddy, she said, very quietly, in a diner booth, in a county that had tried to break her and had instead broken itself against her. 2 days, and you are going to smell that ocean. She finished the run. She and Terry drove the Black Kenworth the last 400 miles west, and they did it slow, the way Elias would have done it, stopping where he would have stopped. And on the final afternoon they came up over a long grade, and the land fell away. And there it was, the whole flat shining plate of the ocean, blue on blue, all the way out to the curve of the earth. Naomi rolled the windows down. The salt came in on the wind, sharp and clean and enormous. She pulled the truck off at an overlook and cut the engine, and she let it tick and cool, the way her father had at the end of every haul, letting the quiet come. Then she took the logbook up off the dash, wounded and dried and whole enough, and she opened it to a fresh page. Because there were still fresh pages. Her father had always left himself room to keep going. And with his old pen, the one she had carried the whole way, she wrote the entry he never got to write. Run complete. West. All the way west. Road ran out at the water. Just like you always said it would. I can smell the ocean. Daddy, it smells like you were right about everything that ever mattered. Delivered. In full. 40 years. And a little late. Your girl. She sat there a long time, with her nephew beside her, and the ocean in front of her, and her father. At last, along for the whole ride, the gulls wheeled overhead. The tide came in and went out again, patient and enormous, the way justice is supposed to be, and so rarely gets to be. And Naomi reached up without looking and touched the creased crayon drawing on the sun visor. The little truck with Whitfield lettered on the door that a furious 11-year-old had once picked up off the floor of a cab in the flat middle of a flat state. And she understood that she had been driving toward this exact overlook her whole life, that every brief she had ever written, every robe she had ever worn, every hard silence she had ever held on a hot hood with a stranger's knee in her back. Had all been one more mile of the very same long haul her father started before she was even born. The changes she set in motion outlasted the headlines, which is the only real test of whether a thing was ever more than a moment. The pattern or practice investigation ran its course and ended in a court-enforced agreement, new training, new hiring standards, an independent monitor with the power to look inside any drawer, in any office, at any hour, a civilian review board with actual teeth in it. It was not a miracle, and Naomi never once oversold it, because she had read too many opinions to believe a piece of paper repairs a culture overnight. But it was a machine turning slowly towards something better, and it was turning because a wound had been forced up into the light and not allowed to close over dirty. And Naomi Whitfield did the thing that mattered to her most of all, the thing that was neither punishment nor headline, but the quiet architecture of the future. She started a fund. She called it the Elias Whitfield Initiative. After a long-haul trucker who was pulled over more times than he could count and came home from every road with his dignity held in his own two hands, because no one alive had ever been able to take the truth of what he had and had not done. The initiative did unglamorous, permanent work. It funded legal aid for drivers and rural families who got stopped and had no one to call. It ran free Know Your Rights clinics up and down the interstate corridors, in the exact truck stops and diners where men like her father had spent their lives, and it printed a plain, laminated card, small enough for a wallet or a visor, that told a driver, in clear and simple language, what their rights were at the side of the road, and how to hold on to them, calmly, and on the record, until help could come. On the back of every card, in her father's gold script, were 4 words. You already won. Hold on. Terry finished law school, and he did not go to the corporate firms that came calling with their signing bonuses. He went into civil rights law, the color of law cases, the pattern or practice work, the side of the courtroom where you stand up for the person who was left on the curb. His aunt could not possibly have been prouder, and she told him so. And then she reminded him to file his motions on time, and Naomi Whitfield went back to the bench. She put the black robe on again, and she climbed back up into the high rafters of the great machine she had given her whole life to. And she sat where she had always meant to sit, up in the high places of the law, remembering, every single day, exactly what it felt like down on the curb. She carried her father's pen in the pocket of her robe. She kept his wounded logbook on the shelf behind her chair, where she could see it. And on the hard days, the days when the machine turned too slowly, and the paperwork buried the very people it was written to protect, she would reach back and lay her hand on that cracked leather cover, and she would hear him, clear as the ocean wind. They can take an hour of your day. They cannot take what you know. You hold on to the truth of what you did and what you did not do, because that is the one thing in this world that is yours and God's. And no man with a badge or a rope has ever once been able to touch it. She held on. She had always held on. She always would. Here is what the road taught Naomi Whitfield, and what her father knew long before she ever did. They did not do it to a judge. They did it to a woman checking her straps, minding her own business, hurting no one. And the only reason the world ever found out is that this particular woman happened to have a convoy of federal marshals and a title that shook the ground beneath their feet. Strip that away, and you are left with the thing that happens every single day, at the side of every road in this country, to people who have no title, and no convoy, and no 6 words to say. That is the story. That was always the story. The badge changes what happens to the men who did it. It changes nothing at all about what they did, or about who they were willing to do it to, when they believed no one was watching, and no one who mattered would ever come asking. Justice came. It came slowly. Too slowly for her father. Too slowly for the veteran left on a January curb. Too slowly for everyone whose complaint died quietly in a drawer. But it came, and when it came, it did not stop at 3 men. It reached for the entire system that had made those 3 men possible. Because punishing the guilty is only relief, and changing the machine is justice. And Naomi Whitfield had given her whole life to knowing the difference between the two. So do not measure a person by the truck they drive, or the clothes they wear, or the color of the hands checking the straps. And do not wait to be decent until you have found out who someone really is. Isaiah Pruitt did not know she was a judge when he made the hardest phone call of his life. He did the right thing anyway. Alone. At cost, when looking away would have been so much easier. That is the whole test. That was always the whole test. Now, I want to hear from you. If you had been standing at that gas station, if it had been your phone, your camera, your nerve, would you have kept recording, or would you have looked away and told yourself quietly that it was not your business? Tell me in the comments below. And tell me this. 2. Have you ever been judged, or stopped, or dismissed before anyone bothered to find out who you really are? Your story matters. And somebody scrolling through these comments tonight needs to read it, and needs to know they are not alone. If this story moved you, hit that like button so it reaches the people who need it most. And subscribe to Beyond the Verdict, so you never miss what comes next. I have picked 2 more stories, right here on the screen. Just for you. Drive safe out there. And whatever they try to take from you, you hold on to the truth of what you did, and what you did not do, because that they can never touch.